Hello friends, my name is Pavik Nursana and I'm a partner with the law firm Khaitan & Co. I am in the M&A and PE team of the firm and based in Mumbai. I'm going to take you through some of the relevant legal provisions which pertain to the M&A and PE deals involving listed companies, and nothing here constitutes any legal advice, and this of course does not cover all detailed procedural aspects. I've tried to keep the video as short as I can, and sort of cover as many relevant points as possible. So let's get started. So what are the topics that I'm planning to cover? What are the types of M&A and PE transactions in listed companies? What are some of the important concepts? What are the stages of a transaction? What are the exemptions available from making an open offer under the takeover code? Public announcement and timing, confidentiality and non-disclosure agreement, due diligence, how is this done, general structuring issues, which is I think a very interesting point, and definitive documents which include share purchase agreement, share subscription, shareholders, open offer and steps and timelines, withdrawal of an open offer, obligations of an acquirer and target, escrow and payment requirements, transactions which does not involve open offer, and disclosures under takeover code and insider trading. So broadly what I'm going to cover is takeover code, insider trading, listing regulations, and SEBI ICDR. So what are the types of transactions under an M&A PE which sort of get covered, which governs the listed companies? So one thing that is important to note is the subject matter, shares, voting rights, and control. These are the three main aspects which control deals in listed companies. So what are the agreements? The share purchase agreement. So there's a share purchase transaction, there's a secondary deal, share subscription transaction, which is a primary issuance of shares, and either of them can involve a shareholders agreement, as you can see in points 3 and 4. And another way to classify is any transaction which either involves an open offer or it does not involve an open offer. And another way of looking at it is whether it's a direct acquisition or an indirect acquisition. There are of course several other types of transactions that you will see in listed companies, such as delisting, business transfer or asset transfer, sale of subsidiaries, scheme of merger. I'm not going to cover those which are not highlighted in bold in this slide. Okay, so let's get started. What are the important concepts? Now, acquisition, as one would understand, it means acquiring some shares, voting rights, or control. However, here it's important to note that even agreement to acquire is covered in the definition of acquisition. So even an agreement to acquire would trigger obligations under the takeover regulations. The next concept is person acting in concert. That's also referred to as PAC. Very important concept. Completely general, and it depends on facts of case of each transaction. So what is important is that for a particular purpose of acquisition of shares, voting rights, or control, or for exercising control on a regular basis, whether a person is acting in concert with another person becomes an important point, because it is important to determine the shareholding of the acquirer or the promoter and acting persons acting in concert, voting rights and control. And also there are several obligations under the laws, which such as open offer related obligation, where the acquirer and PACs are jointly and severally responsible for all the obligations there. Also for disclosure purposes, PAC as a concept becomes significant. So what is PAC? PAC is basically even any person with common objective or purpose is looking to acquire shares, voting rights, or control. As you can see, it's a very generic definition. This is the first part of the definition. Of course, the obligation or onus or to prove whether a person is a PAC or not is with SEBI, in case the first point. Then there is also a concept of deemed PACs, where there are several instances which have been listed in the regulations, which say that they are. So for example, promoters and members of promoter group are deemed PACs. Immediate relatives are also deemed PACs. A group within group companies can also be treated as PACs. In each case, you have if there is an allegation of any violation, then the responsibility will be on the person to prove that they are not deemed PAC or not a PAC. And the next important point is control. This has been a subject matter of dispute or controversy or debate since a long time now. There have been reports, there have been changes in the law, there have been discussion papers and several case laws which have gone into the aspect of what is controlled. Interestingly, in India, the concept of control is not linked to a particular number of shares or a shareholding. It is a generically defined term which says the ability to appoint majority directors or any ability to control the management and policy decisions in any manner whatsoever, as they have sort of pointed out. This becomes important also in minority deals where one has to determine whether a private equity is getting certain rights, whether that amounts to control or not, such as veto rights. And there I think one needs to distinguish between a positive right and a negative right. And there have been Subcom Ventures was an interesting case, and there have been SEBI discussion paper also on the point on whether negative rights and what negative rights would constitute control. There is still no clarity. So therefore, when you are structuring your deals in listed companies, it is extremely important, and especially when you are dealing with minority rights, it is extremely important that you take care of ensure that this does not get triggered, and there are no untoward consequences which come up by asking for certain rights or getting certain rights. This concept is again important from other laws perspective also, such as competition law, foreign exchange law, Companies Act, Insurance Act laws, tax and accounting laws. So I think control has to be looked at specifically, factually in each case, and from a perspective of each law. It's not a generic knowledge or a generic sort of a definition which applies across the board. The other important aspect is an indirect acquisition. As I'm not going too much into detail explaining what an indirect acquisition is, but broadly an indirect transaction, acquisition can be treated as a direct acquisition if the NAV of the target as a percentage of the consolidated NAV, or sales turnover of the target as a consolidated sales turnover, and market capitalization of the target as a percentage of the enterprise value of the entity which is being acquired indirectly. In that case it exceeds 80%, then that acquisition can be treated as a deemed direct acquisition. And there are different provisions which apply for a deemed direct acquisition and an indirect acquisition, and of course a direct acquisition. So if you look at it, there are three ways in which it can be classified. How you can compute market capitalization is also provided on this slide, so I won't sort of go too much into detail in this. The ICDR and preferential issue becomes important when there is a preferential issue proposed by a company to certain select persons. And just take you through some of the relevant provisions. What are the conditions that needs to be fulfilled? You need to have a special resolution of the shareholders. You need to have the security should be fully paid up on allotment, except of course warrants, which I'll deal with later. It has to be in DMAT form. The company should have met with the continuous listing requirements under the listing regulations, and PAN should be available with the allottee, except of course where SEBI has exempted such requirement. The tenure of the convertible securities need to be 18 months. Who are ineligible to get shares or securities in preferential allotment? Anyone, including a promoter group who sold or transferred 6 months prior to the relevant date. Of course, this does not apply to an exempt inter se promoter transfer or a pledge or invocation by certain specific entities like the public financial institutions or NBFC, systemically important, or an insurance company. And if the promoters have let their warrants lapse in the previous 1 year, with of course certain conditions, then that they will also not be eligible, or a fugitive offender will not be eligible to get shares in a preferential issue. Relevant date. Okay, this becomes an extremely important concept because your whole structuring, your pricing of shares, everything depends, and sequencing of your transaction depends on this term, relevant date. And for ICDR purposes, relevant date is sort of defined from equity shares. For equity shares is 30 days prior to the shareholders meeting. So therefore most of the times you will see that the board meeting to approve shares and to approve the deal, to approve the share subscription agreement and to approve the deal generally is called exactly 30 days before the shareholders meeting, so that the price is then frozen on that day, and you could have a fixed price in your definitive agreements, and there is no uncertainty there. For convertible securities, it's either A, which is the same as equity shares, or it is 30 days before before being entitled to apply for conversion. So that's the relevant date. And lock-in is also applicable in preferential, just like in IPO. Here also there is a minimum 20%, maximum 20% lock-in for 3 years for any shares that are allotted in the preferential allotment. And For all others other than promoters, it's 1 year lock-in, and the time sort of during which you hold the convertible instrument is also included in calculating that lock-in period. This, of course, these may not apply in case, or they apply differently in an RBI restructuring or a in similar situations. And the entire shareholding of the allottee pre-issue is locked in for 6 months. That's a very important point that needs to be kept in mind. These regulations, of course, don't apply to conversion of a loan or a convertible debt instrument, a court-approved scheme, a QIP, or issue under SIC Industrial Companies Act, and in certain and in SIC Industrial Companies Act, except lock-in will apply. Other provisions won't apply. Pricing and lock-in do not apply to financial institutions as defined by RBI, and SEBI can relax certain cases disclosure and pricing requirements. For mutual fund and insurance companies, in some cases this may not apply, so that's of course provided in the regulations. And lenders on conversion pursuant to RBI restructurings is also subject to some conditions. This will not apply. Disclosures and pricing requirements are provided in ICDR. I'm not going too much into detail. There is also a restriction on transferability of these instruments because of lock-in, of course, but promoter group is permitted to transfer within their group subject to lock-in requirements. Warrants, as I said, is not is treated a little differently, where 25% of the balance payment needs to be paid upfront, and within balance needs to be paid within the 18-month period. And if it's the price is linked to a formula, then the 25% is calculated based on the formula. The other important aspect, just like relevant date from structuring perspective, is allotment. As a general rule, the shares need to be allotted within 15 days of the special resolution, except of course where the SEBI, you have applied to SEBI for exemption, and then that is pending, or if the SEBI has relaxed as per the SEBI as per a certain order. RBI restructuring related or IBC related schemes also this provision may not apply. And if the open offer is attracted, then the 15 days would apply from the date when for days of after 15 days of PA, all statutory orders, statutory approvals have been approved. So if you have a statutory approval requirement, then your 15 days will start from the date when you approved the statutory period. Again, complications could arise where some investors may need statutory approval, some investors may not need statutory approval, so then that needs to be assessed as to what are the timing at which you will allot shares to each shareholder. The next important concept is a disclosure, where the company is generally required to disclose information to the stock exchanges and to the public at large, and when at the timing of disclosure, because this impacts your sequencing. As soon as the news of the deal is out in the market, the share prices start moving, and accordingly the companies and all stakeholders want to be very careful as to when the information goes out to the market, and you can't create false market either. So only once the information becomes clear, then as a general principle you would want to disclose. However, you need to keep certain points in mind. As one is that if you are issuing a if you are proposing a preferential issue, then a prior intimation of at least 2 trading days prior to the 2 trading days or working days before the board meeting to the stock exchange. So of course, if you are planning a preferential issue, then 2 trading days before the board meeting, information will be out in the public. And general fundraising related board resolutions also need a disclosure within 30 minutes of the decision, and generally also there is as a general principle, it's a very broadly worded provision, where any material event or information which is in the opinion of the board material, then that needs to be also disclosed within 24 hours. And there are certain items in the schedule of listing regulations which are deemed material, and that includes issuance of shares, so that again needs to be kept in mind. So any sort of information relating to issuance of shares need to be disclosed within 24 hours. Of course, this has to be as per the policy of the company on materiality, which the company is required to have under the listing regulations. Right. The next is the insider trading regulations and UPSI. This is again extremely important from diligence perspective and certain other perspective. As a general principle, nobody can trade in shares of the company when in possession of unpublished price sensitive information, and that general rule and unpublished price sensitive information is very widely defined. As you will see, it's any information that relates to company securities directly, indirectly, not generally available, and if made available, it would materially affect the price of the security. So that is extremely important. And there is some deemed UPSI, which is financial results, dividend, change in capital structure, merger, demerger, acquisition, delistings, disposal, business expansion, changes in key managerial person. These are all deemed UPSI. So when is it that the company can communicate UPSI? There are only a couple of instances where a league company can legally issue, communicate, and anybody can procure such information. First is of course the legitimate purpose in ordinary course of business, to your customers, lenders, suppliers, merchant bankers, etc. It's a normal way in which you can communicate. The other is, and for that purpose, the company is required to formulate a legitimate policy to determine what is a legitimate purpose. Again, UPSI can be defined, can be sort of communicated in a transaction situation where there is an open offer, and in that case, the company can, after passing a board resolution, and the board is convinced that it is in the interest of the company to share UPSI with the counterparties, then that situation you can share. The other aspect is when in a transaction does not involve an open offer. Now that becomes tricky, because in that case, not only does the board need a resolution to allow the information to be shared, but also such information needs to be made public 2 trading days prior to the proposed transaction, in a form which is approved by the board, and it should give it the substantially all the UPSI out. The normal way in which people do share this information is put it on the stock exchange and its website and make it public. And it's very important, the next point, that the board needs to pass a resolution, of course, but additionally the board also needs to require the parties to execute a confidentiality agreement. So confidentiality agreement is a must when UPSI is being proposed and when diligence is proposed, and that the person who gets the information should not trade in the securities when in possession. Okay, very quickly to take you through what are the stages. Of course, this may vary from deal to deal, but there are 3 situations where there is a share purchase agreement, there is a share subscription agreement, and there is a share purchase and a share subscription agreement. So typically in a transaction, you will have a confidentiality agreement, you will have a term sheet. I'll take you through the elements of term sheet a little later in the slides. Then there is a due diligence involved, and it's important in a share purchase deal whether a company is involved or not, and that is one thing that you need to always keep in mind in a transaction. Is the company involved in the transaction, and whether the company can pass on information? And of course, if it is apart, then board resolution will be required, as I said in the earlier slide. Then once everything is final, you have your definitive agreements final, you have a board meeting, and there is a signing of documents, and then a public announcement is made. Then there is an open offer which starts. In an open offer situation, you need to deposit in escrow certain amount of consideration which is payable to the public shareholders, which is 25% of 500 crores or 10% above 500 crores. And if you want to complete the transaction before the open offer is completed, as in your SPA transaction, your definitive document transaction, or the underlying transaction, you want to complete it before the open offer is completed, then the acquirer is required to deposit 100% of the consideration in the escrow, and the transaction can be completed 21 working days after the detailed public statement is made. The next is again, then of course your conditions precedent have to be fulfilled prior to that, and withdrawal, again I'll take you through in the later on in the slides whether you can withdraw or not. And then the closing of the transaction, as I said, depending on whether you have deposited 100% or 25% in escrow, accordingly you can close. SSA is very similar. The main difference is that once the agreements are signed and public announcement is made, the transaction, even if you don't deposit 100% in escrow, you could still have your shareholders meeting for resolution for issuance and allotment as per the ICDR requirements, but the shares have to be kept in escrow, and the acquirer cannot exercise voting rights in a share subscription situation. Of course, if this can be changed if you deposit 100% in escrow and you can complete the deal, and then all the other elements are the same. Where there is an SPA and SSA, then you have to follow both the requirements. Quickly taking you through what are the list of exemptions which are available. This becomes important because for every transaction you would try and avoid as far as possible an open offer requirement. It's a cumbersome process, costly affair. So what are the transactions which would help you to get exemptions? So one is, if it's a transaction between qualifying persons are identified as A, B, C, D in the first column, and it says immediate relatives, persons who are promoters as per the filing for 3 years. Then group companies, certain companies within the group, PACs if they're disclosed for 3 years, and shareholders who are PACs for 3 years. And of course, you have to intimate the stock exchange if you're undertaking such a transaction 4 working days prior to the acquisition, and you also file a report, or 21-day report as is required. Then there are certain entities like merchant banker, market maker, underwriter, broker, etc. in their ordinary course of business when they are acquiring shares, and that does not trigger any open offer. A disinvestment situation also is exempt. A SICA transactions involving pursuant to a Sikh Industrial Companies Act as per D, and transactions and amalgamation, reconstruction, demerger, etc., where it involves a target or it does not involve a target, both are exempt. But if it does not involve a target, it is important to know that not more than 25% of cash should be paid, and not more than 33%, at least 33% shareholding should be the same in the resulting company, and a 21-day report needs to be filed. In again, IBC resolution plan is exempt. Acquisition pursuant to a SARFAESI is also exempt. Delisting again is exempt. Transmission, succession, inheritance is exempt. Preference shares, this is interesting, where there is a voting rights are available to certain preference shares per the Companies Act, due to for example, not payment of dividend for 2 years. Then that voting rights, additional voting rights, does not trigger any open offer. Then there is a lender debt conversion as a part of the debt restructuring as per the RBI guidelines, that is also not available. In all cases, of course, you have to file a report with SEBI within 4 working days from the acquisition. Similarly, any unpaid share and unpaid calls, and therefore no voting rights not being available for that shares, and they're pursuant to that as an increase in voting rights, then that increase does not trigger any open offer. Similarly, forfeiture of shares also pursuant to non-payment of calls and resulting in increase in voting rights of others would not trigger. If there's a conversion of shares from having superior rights into ordinary shares, and therefore there's an increase in shareholding or voting rights of certain person, then that does not trigger open offer. There is an exemption available under 3, 1 and 4, which is that you are not really acquiring if you have holding less than 25% shares and you don't have control, and if there's a preferential issue under 164A, which is the distressed situation, then there is an exemption. There is in a case of a buyback where you are holding less than 25% shares, and if you're pursuant to buyback your shareholding breaches the 25% threshold, then you still exempt, provided you divest your additional shares within 90 days from the closure of the buyback and file a 21-day report. Rights issue again is exempt under 3.2. 3.2 means that you already hold 25% shares, and you have a creeping acquisition limit of 5%, and you exceed that limit, then that transaction can still be exempt, provided that you have acquired your entitlement, and if it's beyond your entitlement, then you have not renounced any shares, and the price is of course as per the SEBI price, and you have to file a 21-day report there also. This is a buyback situation where you already hold 25%, and you can still be exempt if you comply with all these conditions, which is you not voted in favor of the resolution. The voting was, if it was required by our shareholders, then it's by postal ballot. If it was if the special shareholders resolution is not required, then interested directors did not vote, and increase in voting does not relate in acquisition of control. Now, that is very important. If all these are compliant, then if you're not compliant, then you can still be exempt, but you divest your shares for following to sort of comply with the regulation of keeping acquisition, and you file a 21-day report. Any exchange of shares pursuant to an open offer would not per se pursuant to that. If you acquire any additional shares in any company, that does not trigger an open offer. And acquisition from any state level financial institution, SLFI, or their subsidiaries or companies promoted by them should also be exempt. And of course you have to intimate 4 working days prior to the acquisition, and acquisition by promoters from VCF, FPCI, AIF, etc. will also be exempt, and you have to file a 4 working days prior report as well as the 21-day report. Right, so the next point is that as soon as you sign your definitive documents, you have to make a public announcement. Now the different as you note, there are different types of transactions that trigger open offer. So this slide really captures all the different types of transactions and how and when does the open offer have to be made or public announcement has to be made. And in case of a direct acquisition, it has to be on the same date as the agreement. In case of market purchase, where if I am triggering open offer by purchasing shares on the open market, then before placing the order, the public announcement needs to be made. And of course, your completion, etc., of your transaction will depend on the as per the open offer regulations. And convertible instruments, which is without fixed date of conversion, will be on the date when you exercise the option, and where there's a fixed date, then 2 working days before the conversion. In a disinvestment, it will be the same date, and in an indirect acquisition, it is interesting, it is 4 working days prior to the date of primary contract, which is your agreement definitive documents that you're going to do. So from the earlier of that, so within 4 working days from your agreement in an indirect acquisition, or your decision is announced in public. So that's an indirect acquisition. If the indirect is deemed direct, then it has to be again earlier of the same day as your primary acquisition is SP definitive documents, or the intention is announced to do the acquisition in a deemed direct situation. In an SSA situation, it's on the day when the board of directors authorize the issue. Of course, if you have an agreement in place for an SSA, then you have to announce it, and the earlier of the two, which is your agreement or the resolution, which I'll cover in the next point. In a buyback situation, which is not exempted, then not later than 19th day from the closure of the buyback. And in case of a date of acquisition which is not in control of the acquirer, then 2 working days from intimation of having acquired the title. And in voluntary offer, of course, the same day. And if there are open offer is triggered in combination of these transactions, then it has to be the earlier of the first of the transactions has happened. That's the date when you announce the make the public announcement. Okay, confidentiality agreement is one of the first agreements that you enter into with the counterparty in any deal, and it depends on whether it's a share purchase situation, share subscription situation, is the company a party to the agreement or not, do you need a board resolution or not. If the company is a party, of course you need a board resolution and the company is going to provide diligence. And question is, whether what do you disclose and if there's a board resolution required. View can be taken that, look, it's too premature and there is no deal on the table, whilst some material information, etc., you still don't disclose. But having said that, you need to be ready that these news get leaked many times, and they are in the papers, and then you receive a query from a stock exchange whether it is happening or not happening. So you need to be ready with a response if at all that situation arises. And in the confidentiality agreement, separately, acquirers or investors usually insist that, look, you will not give any UPSI to me, because once they get the UPSI and if the deal doesn't go through, then they can't trade in the securities of the company. And anyways, they don't want to get into that situation. Similarly, the companies would also want to have an obligation in the confidentiality agreement that, look, you will not trade in the securities of the company when in possession of the UPSI. And usually you also see non-solicit clause, of course, besides the other usual clauses in a confidentiality agreement. Due diligence, again, as I explained, it's a very important process, and it's very different from an unlisted company. Here, UPSI being communicated involves a lot of compliances and restrictions, and a lot of care needs to be taken. And again, the same point, whether company is a party, whether you need a board resolution or not, whether the company can provide UPSI in a diligence. What is UPSI is, of course, the question which keeps coming up every time. So there is a concept of deemed, which is clear, but even beyond that, if there is any information which is important, it's always to be safe. Then be sorry later. Then if the deal does not involve an open offer, as I said earlier, then all this information will need to be made public. So that needs to be kept in mind by the parties, that information may go away and become public. So whether they want to make that information public or not, that sensitivity needs to be considered. Okay, the next is broad structuring issues. Now term sheet I'll cover here. And do you enter into a binding term sheet? The answer is, of course, no, because if it's a binding term sheet, as we saw, the definition of acquisition, when an agreement to acquire triggers a code, so therefore term sheets are always non-binding. The next question is whether there are some clauses, many times we see, are they binding or not. And So like for example, exclusivity, confidentiality, governing law, there is a bit of a gray area, and it's always advisable to keep these provisions also not binding. In fact, in some cases, parties don't even execute a term sheet, and they just have a draft which is there, and it's broad terms, but that nothing is really executed to ensure that there is no agreement in place. In any event, it's non-binding, and the board resolution, whether it's required or not, given that it's a material event, again, you even if you have a board resolution, where the requirement of disclosure is a gray area, and ideally, you don't want to take this such an event to the board. But again, this being a material event, the board may have to consider this issue. That whole aspect needs to be carefully thought through, and accordingly decisions can be taken. Now the next is based what are the kinds of open offers, and how what are the number of shares to be acquired, sold. That some many times gives you that your transaction needs to be structured basis that as well. The first thing that you need to keep in mind is the size of the open offer. There's a minimum size of 26% you have to acquire, and a minimum public shareholding has to be 25%. So you have to ensure that after your acquisition you are not breaching the 75% threshold. So if you are acquiring between 25 to 49 and you add 26 as a minimum open offer size, you will not breach the 75%. So up to 49% there is no issue. But if the transactions involve sale of more than 49%, then that's where the issue comes. Where one has to then structure as to how to ensure that the 75% threshold is not breached, especially for some acquirers who don't want to get into the whole compliance of divesting shares within 12 months as per the listing regulations. If you exceed 75% are pursuant to an open offer. So in such situations, what happens is that if let's say it's a promoter holds 55%, he wants to sell, then there is an agreement to or share purchase agreement where the acquirer agrees to buy just 49%, and depending on the open offer he buys the additional 86%. If the open offer is fully sort of responded to, then 75% is there with the acquirer, and the promoter is left with 6%. He will have to then divest his shares or continue with him with the shares. However, having said that, if he has to ensure that the shares are not that he's not classified as a promoter any longer, and not a PAC risk is not there from both perspectives. So he has to make sure that he's less than 10%. He doesn't have any rights. He's not on the board. He doesn't have any KMP positions. He's completely out, and he only holds 6%, and he's declassified, and as per the procedure provided in the listing regulations. So and that's how you sort of complete the deal. In another situation, there is an equal joint venture which is being proposed, and promoters have, let's say in that situation promoter holds 60% and they want to have a 37.5, so that their total shareholding is 75 and their balance is 25 is by public. How do you ensure that situation where a new strategic guy or a new strategic promoter group is coming in, and there will be a joint venture with an existing promoter? So 60 minus 37.5 is 22.5. So that is what the existing promoters would want to divest. So there will be an agreement to sell 22%, maximum shares from the promoters, and a minimum of 11.5% shares. So because 26 plus 11.5 is 37.5, so the acquirer gets 37.5 if the open offer is fully subscribed to. If the open offer is not fully subscribed, then of course you get additional shares between 11.5 and 22.5 from the promoters, and that's how you try. And of course you will not, it will all depend on how many shares you get in the open offer. If it is fully subscribed, then again the promoter will be left with some additional shares, and he may want to then divest those additional shares and if there could be a situation where there is zero response to the open offer, and then in that case you get 22.5 from the promoters, and the balance number of shares, then again the acquirer will have to acquire from the open market, and then you will have to structure it accordingly. And the other interesting situation is where, let's say, there's a buyout of one promoter group by another, and let's say the total shareholding is about 75%. So so first thing you want to do is you want to try and ensure that transfer is exempt, and under the takeover, because it's inter se promoter group transfer. But if at all for some reason it's not exempt, then how do you structure? Because you then have to make an open offer. Here the open offer size will be 25% instead of 26, because the balance is only available is 25%. And post the open offer, if there's any excess of shares, then that needs to be divested as per the listing regulations. Another interesting situation is in the case of indirect acquisition. And where, let's say for example, it's an indirect acquisition situation where X acquires 40% plus control in Y, which holds 70% in Z, which is a listed company. Then does X trigger an open offer? Yes, because the control has been acquired, so entire 70% is deemed to be of X, and not the percentage or proportionate shareholding. Similarly, later on X acquires further 10% of Y, then okay, does it mean that X is actually acquiring 10% of 70%, which is 7% in X, in Z? The answer is no, because he already has control of 70% in the company. Another interesting concept is the pricing and consideration, because can you really have, especially when a non-resident is involved, can you fix a price in your definitive agreements? Because your price also has to be compliant with FEMA, and FEMA says that when a non-resident is selling to a resident, then the relevant date to determine the price is the date when the transfer happens. Now that leads to a lot of difficulty, especially when there is a huge gap between signing and closing, when there are certain statutory approvals are required, and there will be a long time gap. Then it becomes very difficult. So most of the times you go to, say, RBI and take a prior approval to do the deal, and that sort of increases the problem. And of course then actual number of shares, etc., will also have to be varying as per the agreement, because if there is a top up concept, or if there is an issue about number of shares being coming in from the public, etc., so your price, how much amount will be considered, you have to factor in the maximum and minimum cost involved as an acquirer or investor. Another important aspect is when you're considering shareholding of a group, it's not just the group but even an individual trigger that will individual shareholding will be important. So for example, if somebody is holding 20%, and as a group you have 40%, and if the individual buys another 6%, he will breach his individual threshold and well as the group threshold. But if you have a situation where, let's say, the individual held 23% and he acquired 3%, then as a group you may be within the group creeping acquisition limit, but the individual himself will exceed 25%. So that's an important point that needs to be kept in mind. Can you close the deal in several tranches before and after? Yes, you can. You can have as many tranches as you want, so long as if you want to do it before the open offer, then you deposit 100% of the consideration in escrow, and then you can complete the entire transaction. And in any event, if you're doing it post open offer any tranches, then that has to be within the 26 weeks of closure of the open offer. Can you appoint a director? No, you cannot, because that takeover regulations restrict you from appointing a director during the open offer period. Also, if you have an existing director on board, that director cannot participate or deliberate or vote on any matters. Of course, if you have deposited 100%, then after 15 days after the detailed public statement, you can then appoint a director. Are acquirers and sellers a PAC and an SPA? The answer should be no, because they are not acting as with the common objective and purpose of acquisition of shares. Voting rights are controlled. Also you can argue that it's a adversarial position between a buyer and a seller. What if the open offer is completed by the SPA transaction? That's a very interesting situation, because then you have got all the open offer shares, but your underlying transaction has not happened, and you can see that sometimes in real life as well. So the risk is that the acquirer will come and have some shares stick in the company, so it's not a good situation for him. It's not a good situation for the promoters who are continuing, and they may be treated as PAC if there is a shareholders agreement, etc., in place, and there a lot of complications arise. So you want to try and avoid that situation as far as possible. The other important aspect is that, let's say, what if the letter of offer which is sent to shareholders is finalized with SEBI, and it has certain content which if it is sent in another country could invite any obligation or liability on the company, then or the acquirer, sorry, then can it be sent to that jurisdiction? The answer is yes, you have to still send it. But if your shareholders over there are less than 5%, holding 5% shares, then you don't need to send a letter of offer to those shareholders in that jurisdiction. And but at the same time, those shareholders can tender their shares. Can non-resident shares purchase shares on stock exchange? The answer is no, unless he is already in control of the company, and is a promoter, and he's just consolidating. In that situation, he can purchase on the stock exchange under the FDI route. Can parties complete the deal on stock exchange or the block and bulk deal? Yes, they can, provided the whole 1% from previous closing pricing is matches, which is very difficult. So it's not very usual that you see deals being closed on as block and bulk deal. Okay, what are the definitive agreements and points that you need to keep in mind? Parties, again, SPA transaction, SSA transaction, is a company a party over there? Is it a direct acquisition, indirect acquisition? Your definitive documents will depend on that. Pricing, as I discussed earlier, NR to R, that will always be an issue. There are a lot of, and then it's like just like any other unlisted deal. You have your conditions precedent to comply, with the statutory approvals, third party consents, shareholder resolution requirements, etc. Pre-completion covenants, you need to be careful, because under the competition laws, if at all competition law is triggered, then whether what all is, you should not be sort of in breach of the gun jumping requirements. So you need to assess it from that perspective. At the same time, there are certain statutory obligations during open offer on the company on what they cannot do, for example selling of assets, etc., during the open offer period. You have a normal closing, completion, again warranties. Who gives warranties? Whether it's a share purchase transaction, share subscription transaction, what is the liability, who will be liable, what warranties, basic warranties will be given, detailed warranties will be given, what is the disclosure letter. Again, disclosure letter will depend on the diligence, UPSI. All of those aspects need to be taken care of. As a seller, then you want to ensure that the acquirer has the necessary funds to complete the transaction, so appropriate covenants and warranties can be given by the investor. Of course, you have merchant banker ways to ensure that before the open offer is launched, the acquirer has all the necessary funds. Confidentiality, again, the letter of offer states that the agreement is available for inspection, and certain salient features of the agreements are anyways given in the letter of offer. So your confidentiality, you have to keep in mind that it may not necessarily be your short or definitive documents need not be confidential at all times. Again, if there is a minimum public shareholding requirement, then the requirement is on the acquirer to divest if it's a breach of 75%. In some cases, we've seen that parties can mutually agree on who will divest, this promoters or the acquirer, who will divest the shares. Again, the acquirers, PACs, and parties cannot tender shares in the open offer. Shareholders agreement is more or less similar to unlisted companies, so I won't go too much into detail here, but I think what is most important in a shareholders agreement in a listed company is when there's a minority deal involved, and the whole element of control, whether it's a negative control, positive control, to ensure as a minority investor that you are not having such veto rights which can be deemed that, look, you have control over the company, or any other rights where you have control over the company. And these shareholders rights can be sort of incorporated in the articles with appropriate resolutions from shareholders, and all the other provisions are pretty much very similar to what an unlisted company would be. Right, so the next is what are the steps and timelines that are there. So timelines are on the first column. I'll just quickly take you through the steps. So before you sort of launch and public announcement and sign, you have a merchant banker appointed by the acquirer. Then there is an agreements being signed and public announcement being made. There is sent to the stock exchange, SEBI, and Target. Then you complete the escrow requirement for the open offer within 2 working days prior to the detailed public statement. Then there is a DPS. Then you file a draft of letter of offer with SEBI and stock exchanges. The SEBI needs to provide comments within 15 working days, and then of course if it has asked for clarifications, then then 5th day from there you have to then file, and then there is a letter of offer which needs to be dispatched, and then there is a tendering period to commence, and that is 10-day period, and then acquirer has to complete all the formalities, approval. If the statutory approvals are delayed, then and if it is shown by SEBI that, look, that's been the default on the part of the acquirer, then they may require payment of interest as well. Then there is the whole post offer. You have to file an advertisement saying that this is it's like a report, is that it is all completed. What are the steps, what are the number of shares in the open offer, what sort of how the whole open offer was completed. Right, so the next is very important. Again, when you enter into a deal with a listed company, one thing that you need to keep in mind, especially which involves an open offer, this is not an issue which comes up with it doesn't open offer is not involved. It's very, very difficult to withdraw once you sign. So once you sign, then it's very difficult to get out, even if you don't complete your own transaction between the parties, but open offer needs to be completed. The object is to ensure that the SEBI wants to ensure that wants to protect the interest of the minority shareholders and the securities market generally, that this is not manipulated, this whole open offer process and concept. So it requires that only in limited and exceptional circumstances that open offer can be withdrawn by parties. So what are those circumstances? One is the statutory approvals which is required for the open offer, or the underlying have been finally refused, or the acquirer being a natural person has died, or if any conditions are specified and it's beyond the reasonable control of the acquirer and they cannot complete the conditions, and such other circumstances as SEBI may sort of consider. This is a generic sort of requirement, but it has to be read in along with the points 1, 2 and 3 as an adjustum generis principle. Preferential issue, if it's a preferential issue, then even if your shareholders resolution is fails and you can't get preferential issue, you still have to complete the open offer. Now, if there have been several instances in the past where SEBI has refused withdrawal of offer in spite of apparently seeming to be fair conditions, but SEBI is said, like for example, if there's a fraud in the company or there's an economic loss with the company, or there has been delay by SEBI in responding to open or to the letter of offer, or there is a violation of regulations by the promoter or fraud by the promoter on the company. If there's a litigation, irrespective of whatever is the circumstances, SEBI finds it very difficult to allow. So I mean, you have to be really really mindful that once you sign the deal, then it's going to be extremely difficult for you to get out of the open offer obligations for sure. Right, so quickly going through what are the general obligations of the acquirer and target company is, of course, you have to ensure that the firm financial arrangements are made. The acquirer, once he acquires the company, then for 2 years post the offer, he cannot alienate material assets of the target company or subsidiary unless shareholder special resolution is taken by postal ballot, and of course you have to declare this in the detailed public statement. And no sale should be sort of during the open offer, acquirer and PACs cannot sell any shares. Various obligations on target, some of them are that you have to carry on the business in the ordinary course. Now this is during the open offer period, so that is one good thing from an acquirer perspective, to protect the acquirer, that the business is carried in ordinary course during the open offer. And if there is a special resolution is required for these items, like if you want to alienate material as assets, or borrow something materially outside the ordinary course of business, or there's issuing an allotment of unissued securities, buyback, material contracts, accelerating third party rights, etc. Subsidiaries general meeting, also you have to ensure that you vote as per the target's resolution, and you have to give all the details to the acquirer as a company during the open offer period, as they will have all the info. And then the detailed after the detailed public statement is received, then you constitute a company is required to constitute a committee of independent directors who will recommend on the open offer, and that recommendation needs to be a reasoned one. The other interesting and important point is escrow as a concept, because this involves outflow from the acquirer. As I said, it's 25% of 500 crores or 10% above the 500 crore amount. 100% needs to be deposited in case of indirect acquisitions. That is one important point that needs to be noted. And any upward revision, of course, will require upward revision of escrow as well in the price. What are the forms of escrow? It could be cash deposit, bank guarantee, or equity traded shares that are freely transferable, or any other securities with appropriate margins. If it's a bank guarantee, then 1% cash deposit is still required, or securities, of course, then it need 1% cash. If in cash escrow, of course, the manager is authorized to issue checks, so the control on the money goes to the manager. Bank guarantee again has to be in favor of the manager. If it's securities, then again manager is authorized to sell the securities where required, and release only prior 30 days from the payment to all shareholders. And SEBI may direct that you in case of non-compliance, there is a forfeiture of escrow, and payment needs to be completed within 10 working days from expiry of tendering the period. Alright, so again, when the transaction does not involve an open offer, it's a much easier transaction. The obligations are much lesser. But again, when you are saying that when you are acquiring less than 25%, up to 24.99, that is, or there is no control, then it will not involve an open offer. And the disclosure requirements you still have to meet. You still have to ensure that there is no control, as we discussed earlier. Your veto rights that you get are extremely important. What veto rights you get. Withdrawal is possible because there is no open offer required, so your agreements can provide when the transaction can be called off. Disclosure of UPSI is another important point that you need to note, where the open offer is not involved at 2 trading days prior to the transaction. And of course what all rights you can depending on the rights that you take from various laws perspective, not just SEBI but even competition law perspective, whether it's a control deal or not, that needs to be determined. So what are the disclosures that are required pursuant to a transaction? If the promoter and a person acting in concert, their shareholding has to be aggregated. Convertible securities are treated as shares for this, and disclosures are to be made accordingly. Encumbrance is very widely defined, so if there is any right or restriction created on the shares by the promoters, that needs to be evaluated and disclosed appropriately. What is the time period for disclosure? So it is within 2 working days of either the acquisition, disposal, or receipt of intimation or allotment. And what is the thresholds for disclosure? It's acquirer plus PAC. If they hold 5% or more in aggregate, then if they acquire, then they disclose. And if a person and any PAC with him or her is holding already 5% and there's a change of more than 2%, 2% or more, then again, since the last disclosure, then they have to disclose it to the stock exchange and the target. Creation and acquisition. Creation of acquisition encumbrance is, so creation of encumbrance is an acquisition, and release is a disposal. Accordingly, disclosures have to be made. Continual disclosures, where a person and a PAC already hold 25%, then you have to disclose the shareholding as of 31st March. And promoter plus PAC, in any event, if you're a promoter, then you still have to disclose your shareholding within 7 working days on the end of the financial year to the stock exchange and the target. As I said, creation, invocation, release, all of these events of encumbrance, by the promoters needs to be disclosed within 7 working days of creation, invocation, or release. And there is a declaration of no encumbrance that the promoters need to file. Every within 7 days of the financial year end every year. What other disclosures under insider trading regulations? Well, there's a KMP, which is a key managerial person, director, promoters, promoter group. They need to disclose their shareholding within 7 days of appointment or becoming promoter or member of promoter group. And a promoter or member of promoter group, directors, designated persons need to disclose to the company. So and the company needs to disclose to the stock exchanges within 2 working days of becoming aware. And if the whole concept, they need to have a code of conduct, they need to have designated persons defined, they need to have what is the disclosure policy for trading in shares. All of that needs to be well defined in the company. So I think, thank you very much. I hope you find this useful, and I would be happy to connect if you have any questions on this.